Greetings, astronauts, and welcome back to Astro Candy. Hello, I'm your host, Raven, and I'm a little bit nervous to share this vulnerable episode about healing from heartbreak, which kind of sounds silly as I say it because I know we've all been there. We've all gone through breakups and relationships have ended, whether they're romantic or friendships or family relationships. You don't talk to your mom or your dad anymore. But yeah, I'm just a little bit nervous to kind of lay it all out there and talk about how I coped with probably my biggest heartbreak, but how ultimately I practiced radical self-love to find hope and healing and happiness. And I am ultimately excited to share that with you. You know, when I'm brainstorming episodes, I focus on 3 types. This is where my Capricorn analytical brain comes in. I focus on interviews with guests. That's 1. 2 is how-tos and step-by-steps. And then the 3rd one is personal stories. Maybe you've noticed, maybe you haven't, that my personal story episodes are much fewer than the others. And that's honestly because it just requires so much more transparency and vulnerability. And sometimes I'm just not up to reliving some of those experiences or memories or feelings. Like when I write the show notes for episodes like this, I am in it to the point where I have to take a few days breather and then come back and sit down and actually record the episode because I'm just burying my soul in typed words and then I'm rehashing it as I speak it to you. But anyway, what's funny is these are the episodes that usually connect with the most people. And so I'm going to lay my pride aside this week and talk about coping with grief, the grief that comes with the loss of a relationship, and then practicing a radical self-love to find hope and healing and happiness, specifically after a breakup. I think this episode can, you can listen back if you're going through a breakup with a friend or an actual loss, a death in the family or by friend, or just, a relationship ends. It really is applicable to all of these because you're losing someone. I think that's just what it boils down to. When you lose someone, this is kind of what you go through. But specifically, this episode is through the lens of going through a breakup. And one of the reasons I wanted to share this is because I am in my early 30s. I'm 32. And if you're like me, maybe you're in your late 20s, early 30s, you may have had a similar experience where you are with the person that you think you're going to marry, but for whatever reason, that relationship ends. And so I'm going to share my experience with this because especially as a woman in her 30s, there is nothing more devastating than going through a breakup at that pivotal time in life. And if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my God, that's so, get over it. Life is long. You've got so many years ahead of you. I'm not saying that's not true, but what I'm saying is as a woman and with societal expectations, and you can't deny that they're not there. Women in their 30s are expected to be in a relationship, a marriage. They're expected to have kids. And so when you feel like you're on that trajectory in your late 20s, early 30s, but then that trajectory comes to an abrupt halt, you feel like the rug's been pulled out from under you. And it's more than just about losing this person in your life and a hope of a future with them, but just a hope of a future at all because you were envisioning marriage and kids on this timeline. And now everything is just so completely different. So that is really where I'm coming from with this episode in particular. It's really for, anybody who's ever gone through a heartbreak, but especially if you're at that time in your life where you're like, oh my God, I was with the person I thought I was going to end up with and it just did not work. And now I feel like I'm back to square one, starting over, and I just am in absolute pieces. And out of respect for this other person, I'm not going to be talking about the details of the breakup or even going into any of that. This is really just about what happened right after we broke up and how I coped with the loss. So let's talk about it. I remember that the day we broke up, the first thing that I felt, the immediate feeling was a profound sense of relief. I know that sounds a little bit fucked up, but if you've ever experienced a breakup, you know that more often than not, it's preceded by a tremendous amount of tension, hardship, trying times, frustration, arguments. It's not usually just out of the blue, like one day. I mean, I'm not saying that that can't happen, but for me, in my experience in this particular relationship, like there was a buildup, there was tension, there was just a lot weighing down energetically. I just felt so frustrated and drained, and things were just fucking hard. And it was like the pot on the stove was boiling and it's bubbling over, and you can kind of hear the water hitting the burners and it's searing and it's steaming. But like the second you take it off the burner, it's like silence. And that's how it felt, just like silence and stillness and quiet and relief. And it felt so fucking good. But of course, that lasted a week or two max, because that is when I started feeling the gravity of the loss. Like 2 weeks after is when I really was like, wait a second. It was like the silence and that stillness that I found relief in. It was suddenly emptiness. You know, when you're with someone for so long and that relationship was just over 2 years, like your lives merge together. You share a lot. You share friends, hobbies, interests, shows, vacations, celebrations. You share hairbrushes. You share towels. You share, like, you're meshing everything. You share a life together. And so when that person is no longer a part of your life, you kind of feel like you've lost some of yours. And you might even feel like you've lost yourself. Like I couldn't remember who I was before him. So a little bit of context. We had started dating in the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, just before COVID. And truthfully, I'm so thankful for that relationship, because once the world shut down and we were isolated, we had each other. And that was a really crucial time in everybody's lives. And I can't imagine going through it alone, because I didn't have any family in Dallas at that time. And, we weren't even allowed to see anybody anyway. So I'm very thankful that I had that relationship to lean on. But like everybody else, COVID completely derailed my life, my trajectory. And so that kind of played into me not remembering who I was, because pre-COVID me was gone. So it was like COVID happens, I get into this relationship, and then my identity around my career and success is unraveling. So I'm finding a new identity in that relationship in him. And then when the relationship ends, you're like, oh my God, all I know is this identity that I created for myself when I was in that relationship. So now I really have no idea who the fuck I am. So at this point, 2 weeks post breakup, I did the only thing I really had enough willpower to do, which was journal. I journaled every thought, every feeling, every day. Sometimes I would write to myself. Sometimes I would write to God. Sometimes I would write to him. And through writing, I was able to work through my feelings. And I think it's like trivialized now. You hear it so much. Feel your feelings. But it really is so important to not hide them. Don't suffocate them in the hopes that they'll disappear, because they won't. So I would journal, or open up a document on your computer, or type something, or record a voice note, just something to get those feelings out of your brain. And most importantly, don't judge them, because you're going to have so many feelings that are going to be hard to decipher anyway. Like it's going to be anger, hatred, resentment, sadness, fear, like every emotion you're going to experience it. And it's going to be really hard to process. So the easiest way is to just word vomit it out however you feel is best. And once I started journaling, I started actively grieving. I think most people, when they think of grief, they think it comes with coping with a loss like death. And obviously it does. I mean, I've grieved so many family members, aunts, uncles, grandparents who have passed away. And it does not matter if it's like expected or not. It hurts just the same. But the reality is grieving happens when you're coping with any loss. The loss of a friendship, the loss of a job. You're moving to a new city, and so you're mourning the loss of the life you had in that old city. Or maybe you're getting married and you're really excited about it, but now you're grieving the loss of that past chapter of your life when you were single. And of course, grieving a breakup. I think with any type of grief, any type of loss, especially when it comes to a person, you just have so many unanswered questions, and our brains really want answers to those questions. We want closure. We want finality. I think death is maybe the closest you get to finality, because it's like, yes, you may have some unanswered questions, but the finality is that they're gone, and you kind of grapple with the fact that you won't see them again on this physical plane. Whereas when you're coping with the loss of a friend or a relationship, not only are you also grieving the loss of that person and the future that you'd hoped you'd have with them, which is the same when someone passes away, but knowing that they're still alive on this planet, there's a level of like hope that comes with that. It's like open-ended. It's like, I don't know, maybe I could reconnect with them, or maybe we would run into each other. Like, that is the one thing that gets me when it comes to like breakups, is a little sliver of hope that the possibilities that are still in our mind about like the future, especially right after the breakup and like the weeks and months following it, where you have not accepted that the relationship is over or the friendship is over. That's where I really find that hope coming in. But what I want to talk about is the 5 stages of grief. There's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I want to go through these 2 because I think it's really important to understand exactly what they are and what they mean, and also to destigmatize them. Like, if you're feeling any of these feelings, it is normal. Denial is when you refuse to accept the reality of the loss. And this is a defense mechanism that usually helps us cope with these overwhelming emotions. And then there's anger. It's when the reality of this loss sets in and you've got feelings of frustration and resentment, and you may direct your anger toward this person that you broke up with, or yourselves, or even just other people, or the situation itself. There's bargaining. In this stage, you may try to negotiate with a higher power, God, the universe, or just try to find ways to regain what you lost. Maybe you're making promises like, oh, if I do this, like maybe they'll come back. Or maybe you're just like wishing for things to be different. That's bargaining. Depression is when you're feeling sadness and regret and hopelessness, especially. And again, that's a natural response to the profound sense of loss and change. And acceptance. Eventually there is a gradual acceptance of the reality of the loss. And that doesn't mean that you're okay with it, by the way. Like, it's not like, yes, I accept it and everything's fine. No, it really just means that you found a way to live with it and move on. Now, a lot of people think the 5 stages of grief are like levels in a video game. You pass the denial level and you move on to anger, and then you pass the anger level and you move on to bargaining. And then when you win the bargaining level, you move on. But actually, these are interchangeable. So much so that they change weekly, daily, hour to hour, minute by minute. I mean, you can feel all of them. You can feel none of them. You can feel a couple of them at a time. And it really does feel like you're spinning around and around and around, like on those fucking teacups on Disneyland, where it's like the platform is spinning and the teacups are spinning and your thoughts are spinning and you just want to fucking throw up. Now, I spent a lot of time in denial after my breakup. I mean, despite initiating the breakup, I created this reality that we're just taking space and we're going to work on ourselves, and eventually we'd get back together. And then, of course, I'd be really angry with myself, how I handled situations, or how I let myself be treated, angry with him, how he handled the situation, how he treated me, angry that we couldn't make the relationship work, angry at the situation. And then there was a lot of bargaining, wishing that things had turned out differently. And of course, the depression and sadness and crying all the fucking time. And I mean, it took me probably over a year to experience any type of acceptance, which is something I judge myself for so hard. I was like, Raven, get the fuck over this. But you know what? You just can't. You cannot rush the process, and you definitely should not judge the process, because the more you judge the process, the more you throw a wrench in your healing process and progress. I want to go back to what I was saying at the beginning of this episode and exactly where I was post-breakup, going through all the stages of grief. I mean, it is just really fucking hard to accept that the future you envisioned for yourself isn't going to happen. Talk about a fucking ego blow. Devastation. And it's really hard to accept that at 30, at 31, that you are now single. When you thought you were going to be engaged and married and having kids soon and starting a family and doing the whole thing that all your friends are doing. But no, Now you're single. You're like back to square fucking one when all your friends are like settled down, married with children. Oh my God. Again, emphasis on the pressure, the societal programming of this is where women need to be at in their lives. And if they're over, it's just hurled at us. And it's like, oh, well, if you're not in a relationship, you need to start thinking about freezing your eggs and do it. Like, it is overwhelming. It's overwhelming, the pressure to be in that place already. And then to know that you're not in that place, it is just tough to cope with. So if you are in that position where you have gone through a breakup at a really pivotal time in your life where you thought like this was the person and now I feel so off track, just know I see you. I hear you. I'm with you. I support you. I have been there. I am there. Like, I'm over the breakup, but I'm still single. I'm still getting my life back on track and I'm still creating a future without that person. So it's possible, but it doesn't suck any less. For someone like me who's always been very goal oriented, like I set goals, I achieve them. It's again, the Capricorn stellium in me. I love a good goal. I love achieving that goal. I love moving on to the next goal. It is really fucking hard for me, especially to accept that things are not going my way. I'm not great at the pivot. I'm not great at the process. But this entire experience helped me realize that you just cannot rush the experience or the process, and you cannot rush getting to acceptance. Like, you can't rush the grieving process. You can't rush the healing process. You just have to experience all of the emotions all the time. It's going to be a lot. It's going to be a roller coaster ride. It's going to feel overwhelming. You're going to want to unsubscribe. You're going to want off. It's going to be fucking hard, but you got to get through it. And you have to get through it. You cannot deny your feelings. You cannot shove it down. You cannot try to move on by just like getting into a new Nope, it's not going to work. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But as we move on and I tell you kind of like what exactly I did to really heal from this heartbreak, I just want you to know that while I'm doing these things I'm about to talk about, and I'm going to encourage you to do them too if you're in the same situation, but while I was doing all this, I was going through all those crazy grieving emotions, all of the anger, the denial, the bargaining. So all of that is happening simultaneously. Like, and I'm still journaling and all of it is like, bleh. It's all just a big mess, but I'm trying. And so here's what I did. So one of the first thing I did was commit to therapy and a self-help practice. I went to therapy every single week. And I also fully committed to this program called To Be Magnetic. Maybe you've heard me talk about it on this podcast before, but it's a neural manifestation program that I joined 2 months before my relationship ended. But given everything that was going on in my life, because if you've heard my Surviving Saturn's Return episodes, you know I was not just going through a breakup at this time. I was also in the throes of the legal process after an assault, and I was getting over COVID, and I was just very deeply unhappy at my dream job, quote unquote. So I will link those episodes in the show notes if you want to hear more about my disastrous Saturn return. But I'm alive and well, so what does that tell you? But therapy is really one of the safest places to meet yourself and to work through emotions and to get a third-party POV on your life, especially from somebody who is a licensed professional. This is not just your friend over here telling you what you want to hear, okay? This is somebody who has a completely objective viewpoint, and they're going to help you see through the weeds of your emotions. You know, therapy has gotten me through some of the worst times in my life. I've had so many highs and so many lows in my life. If you know my story, I've picked up and moved more times than I can count. New jobs, new cities, new friend groups. It's been fucking exhausting, and therapy has gotten me through all of that. So I cannot recommend it enough. But if you don't have access to therapy or you can't afford it, I fucking get it. It's fucking expensive, especially because the best therapists are the ones with their own private practice and they don't accept insurance, which is just like a big conundrum to me, but I digress. So if not therapy, I recommend discovering your own self-help practice that's community-oriented, and that's key. So like I said, I joined TBM, which I'll link in the show notes. This was really vital to my rediscovery process. A lot of the messaging And the podcast, there's a free podcast you can listen to, but a lot of the messaging and a lot of the programs and what am I trying to say? What are those things that you can kind of go, the workshops, there we go. The workshops are very therapy driven. Like you are going through your subconscious, your limiting beliefs, your earliest childhood memories, and working through those and healing any wounds that you may have. So highly recommend it. I will link it in the show notes. But through TBM, I also met some of the best friends I ever made in Philly because they had something called meetups. So it's a huge community group. And then within the community, you can find people in your city and meet up with them. So this is also what I mean by if you're going through it and you're in the fucking thick of it, not only do you want to commit to a self-help practice, but you want to do one that has community support. It is just not worth it to go it alone. Like you shouldn't have to go it alone. And you shouldn't want to go it alone. I know the initial thoughts when you're going through a hard fucking time is to self-isolate. That is my tendency. But trust me, you need sounding boards. You need people to lean on. You need people who see you and love you and can inspire you to get you through this tough time. And if none of that appeals to you, if you're like, I don't really want to do therapy and I don't want to seek out a community group, I think you're missing out. But books, read books. I am a slut for a good self-help book. Jen Sincero's You Are a Badass. Oh my God, I think I've read it 7 times by now. Any type of self-help, self-improvement, personal development, whatever the fuck they call it these days, book is going to be amazing. Journal your thoughts, journal your feelings or voice note them, however you need to get it out. Confide in a close friend or family member. But if you do, just here's my forewarning, choose wisely. Choose somebody who can really put their bias aside and hear you out objectively. Because as much as our friends want to help us, it's just never fucking helpful to hear, oh my God, well, he's a loser anyway. Or, oh, well, he was the worst. Or like, oh my God, now you can finally move on to someone who deserves you. Like, I know our friends are well-meaning when they say shit like that. But when you are in the throes of actually mourning someone and a life you are going to have with them, that is the last fucking thing you want to hear. It's the last fucking thing you want to hear. So make sure you confide in people who can just listen and just support you and just be your shoulder to cry on. And then the caveat to that is don't take advantage of their kindness, because you will sound like a broken record. And at the very least, if you're going to therapy, you're paying that person to listen to your gripes. Your friends are doing it out of the kindness and goodness of their heart. And they have every right to be like, hey, okay, I'm done. I'm done hearing that, which I've had friends say to me too before. So that's the first step in this process when you're just in the thick of it, going through all the emotions and the grieving process. That's the first step. The second thing that I did for myself in this process of healing from heartbreak was figure out who the fuck I was, who I am. Like I said, when you're in a relationship for so long, it's easy to lose parts of yourself in that relationship, in that life you shared together, because you're sharing so much with that person. Like I said, friends, hobbies, interests. And sometimes it's not always balanced. I mean, ideally in a perfect world it would be, but it's just not. And I take responsibility for my actions, leaning into his life more than mine. I knew we would spend a lot of time with his friends instead of mine, or at his house instead of mine, with his family instead of mine. That was all on me though. I just I loved it. I wanted to be part of his world, his friend groups, his family, his life. And, you know, at the time you're thinking, oh, well, I love this person so much, so it doesn't matter. But it does. It does matter, especially when you look back in hindsight and you're not together anymore and you're like, oh my God, my whole world was them. And now I feel like I have no world because they're gone. So that can be detrimental to you as a person in your personal development, but also to the relationship. Like, I have to call myself out here a little bit. And I give myself some grace because, like I said, it was a weird fucking time to get into a relationship with someone. I don't recommend going through a global pandemic and meeting someone. But in all of that, like I said, we're both going through the throes of it. What we once knew about the world, society, our career trajectories, everything. You know how it was. COVID just wiped the slate clean. So you're trying to figure out how the fuck you're going to move around in the world. And then you make that person your world. And that's a lot of pressure to put on somebody. So I am admitting that is kind of what I did in that past relationship. And you know, I think it was a little bit mutual. We both kind of leaned on each other when we Probably wouldn't have if, again, we weren't going through a global fucking pandemic. But I digress. These are lessons that you can just learn from me, okay? Please learn them from me so you don't have to go through them yourself, because they are fucking tough lessons. But anyway, this is a really good time to be intentional about rediscovering what you like and investing in yourself. I remember just having this period of like, okay, like what kind of music do I like? If this person is no longer an influence in my life, then what kind of food do I want to eat? And if this person's no longer an influence in my life, then what kind of activities do I like? And what kind of movies do I like? And shows and restaurants and experiences. And I really became like the main character of my life again, instead of a supporting character in somebody else's. I got back into Pilates. I started going on daily walks. I took a candle making class. I love candles. I live for them. I would inject them into my veins if I could. So I go to a candle making class and I start making candles. I'm going to the movies. I'm going to like this witchy potion cocktail bar, and I'm having friends in town, and I'm going to the shore and Ohio and Minnesota and Baltimore and New York and Texas and Ireland. And I'm trying a bunch of restaurants, and I'm reading fiction books again. I got into fiction thanks to Colleen Hoover, who's a gateway drug into fiction and fucking chick lit. I decorated my apartment. I spent a week in Southern California to see if it was somewhere I wanted to live, which, spoiler alert, it was. I reconnected with old friends. I made vision boards. I went to a Harry Styles concert. I rebranded my podcast and launched season 3. I worked with a career coach and started my career pivot. I got into voice acting. I did an audio horror series for the radio. I tried golfing. I made cake pops. I went to the World fucking Series. I did everything that even in the slightest interested me. And note that I did not do things that I didn't want to do, and I didn't do things for the sake of doing things or distracting myself. But I was very intentional. I was like, I'm going to do what I want to do and what I have an interest in doing. And that is so fucking empowering as being a single person. Like, I know it's not exactly sexy to be single, but do you know how fucking amazing and freeing it is to do whatever the fuck you want, whenever the fuck you want? And not have to worry about what anybody else thinks or how it's going to affect them and their life and their feelings. And, oh, you're busy that weekend. And, well, but I wanted to do this. And, like, it's just so fucking nice. That is the one thing now, like, where I'm at in my life, I'm just thinking about getting into a new relationship. You know, because I do eventually want a partnership. I do want partnership, but man, it's nice to be single and not have to worry about anybody else. But the point of all of this is, I want you to pretend like you are a chef baking a cake without a recipe. And you're using ingredients that you know you need, like flour and sugar. And you're kind of sprinkling in ingredients that, you know, might add to it. Maybe you want some salt in there or pumpkin spice. And you don't know the exact measurements, right? You're sort of just experimenting and you're making a huge fucking mess in the kitchen. But you know that once you nail this recipe, it's going to be fucking delicious. Like, this is going to be the best cake you've ever fucking made. And best of all, it is your secret recipe. Nobody else has it but you. So your list of things or ingredients are going to be way different than mine. Like, you're going to connect with different groups of people than I did. You'll find different hobbies, probably different activities, different places to vacation. And that's okay. But it's the same process. You're mixing, you're matching, you're pouring, you're stirring, you're getting creative, you're getting excited, you're making mistakes. You're deciding what you love, you're deciding what you hate. This is the fun part. And these are all really constructive ways to, one, find yourself, and two, I mean, this is why you're listening to this podcast, to cope with heartache in a healthy way. We aren't drinking ourselves into oblivion. I've tried that, and you can listen to my Sober Curious episodes if you want to hear how that went for me. I'll link them in the show notes. And we're not mindlessly swiping on dating apps to replace our ex, and we're not indulging in self-destructive behaviors or anything that's going to hinder our healing process. No, we're doing things that we just genuinely enjoy and that are supportive of our growth and our highest good, because you get one shot at this, and you're going to end up doing it now or you're going to end up doing it later. And what I mean by that is this. I sincerely advise that if you are getting out of a long-term, serious relationship with the person that you thought you were going to marry, that you do not try to move on without being an active participant in the grieving process and starting a self-help practice and reconnecting with yourself and learning the lessons that that past relationship taught you. Because if you don't, the likelihood that you carry this grief and those wounds and those limiting beliefs and that heartache and those self-sabotaging patterns into your next relationship for your next partner to deal with are huge. It's called baggage. And it's not fair to your future partner when you come into a relationship with 4 checked bags and a carry-on and a personal item, and then you expect them to help you unpack it. That is what a fucking therapist is for. That is what your own personal development journey is for. I know how it feels to have a partner lug their baggage into your relationship, and suddenly you are paying for the sins of all their exes, and it fucking sucks because your relationship doesn't stand a fucking chance. When you have not gotten over your own shit and you go into that new relationship and you bring it into that new relationship, unless you are dating our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, or a fucking doormat, they're not going to want to put up with that shit. Or they'll put up with it for a while and then they'll get to the point where they're fucking done. As you can see, I've been on the receiving end of people who do not work through their shit. But chances are, if you're listening to the Astro Candy podcast, you are committed to dealing with your own shit. So that leads me to my next phase in the healing from heartbreak process, learning the lessons from that person, from that experience, and taking that knowledge and applying it, moving on. I say moving on instead of moving forward because if you can do all 4 of these steps, you've moved on. Yeah, you heard me. Moving on does not mean that you're in a new relationship. I know our society likes to think it does. Like, oh, they're in a new relationship now, so they've moved on. No. You can still have all your fucking bullshit from the past relationship and go on into the next one and not be over it. And we know people who have done that. Moving on means you've gone to therapy, you've sorted through your feelings, you've cultivated a self-healing practice, you've rediscovered and found yourself, and you have grown as a person because you learned your lessons and you're applying them moving forward. So what lessons did I learn? Well, before that relationship, I thought I had to prove myself to be loved. I thought I had to be perfect to be loved. And I thought that having a partner proved that I was worthy of love. But after all the work, I realized that that's not love at all. I learned that your partner is a mirror of all your insecurities and fears. And the one that helps you work through those insecurities and face those fears and love you and support you is the right partner. Keyword there, helps. They're not doing the work for you, but they are there to hold you accountable and support you. What else did I learn? I learned that just loving someone is not enough to build a lasting relationship. And I learned that no matter how much you want something to work, that doesn't mean it will. And if it doesn't work, that doesn't mean you failed. It means you tried and you learned some lessons along the way. And I also learned that no matter how much time passes, or if you've moved on, the person that you shared a relationship with will always have a place in your heart because they were somebody you loved, you know? And just because somebody's no longer in your life doesn't mean that you can't still have love for them. And that's okay. I'm kind of talking to myself here. I used to think like I had to be so moved on that they were completely wiped from my memory. But yeah, that's just not the case. And that's probably not healthy. And that's just not mature. So it's been more than 2 years since that relationship ended. It's so wild to say that because I remember being in the throes of it and just being like, I'm never going to make it. I'm never going to make it through this. I thought my life was fucking over. And it's funny because people tell you that. They're like, oh my God, you're going to think your life is over, but it's not. But when you're in it, you're like, my life is fucking over. And you know what? If that's what you want to think, that is fine. Because when your life does in fact go on and you are on the proverbial other side and you're looking back and seeing how fucking far you've come, you're going to be like, wow, life does go on. And I got through it. Now, don't get me wrong. This isn't some right off into the sunset, sunshine and rainbows, fairy tale ending. While I consider myself moved on and my heart healed, memories still come back. And I still experience grief from time to time. I just have a greater capacity to hold on to it now. And that is okay. What's important is that you give yourself patience. You have to be gentle with yourself during this healing process, and you cannot judge your journey. I think for me, the process of healing from heartbreak would have been made easier if I just wasn't so hard on myself. Like I was constantly judging my feelings and shaming myself for not being in a new relationship. And I was always criticizing myself for just not being the person who just got over it. But what if I told you that getting over it is not an on-off switch? Think of a light. It's not something that you can flip on or off. It's actually like a light that can dim. And it starts off, and then slowly, as time goes on, the light gets a little bit brighter and a little bit brighter, and you can see more of what's in the room, and then a little bit brighter. You can see even more, and the shadows are gone, and then it gets brighter, and then one day you notice that the light is at maximum brightness, and you can see everything, and it's so clear, and it feels good, and you're like, I have clarity. But you don't even remember that it happened because it happened so gradually. That's the healing process. I think if you've ever been through a breakup, you can relate to this. And if you are going through a breakup, some of this will resonate now, but some of it won't. I'm going to be honest, because you can't see the forest through the trees. But just know I've been in those trees. And like I said, I did not think I would make it out alive. But here I am, living and breathing and bearing my soul on this episode of the Astro Candy podcast in the hopes that it helps someone. And I hope that it helped you, or it helps a friend. If you send this episode to them, I would really appreciate it. Leaving a review. I saw more reviews come in. You're the best. I fucking love you. If you could leave a review, 5 stars, or just write something sweet, cute little note on Spotify or Apple, I would really love and appreciate it. And if you want more episodes like this, let me know. In hindsight, I'm always happy to share stories like this, but it just feels so fucking cringe when I'm sitting down and recording it, and I'm like, oh my God, I hope one person gets what I'm saying. Otherwise, I feel like a fucking freak. See, my inner critic is so fucking harsh. I need to work on that. I need to do some more journaling. All right. I thank you again so much for listening to this episode of the Astro Candy podcast. Don't forget that at the end of this month, we are going on a summer hiatus. So the only episodes that will be up through the summer months are stargazing. And of course, we'll have our newsletter drop on each zodiac season. So we still will be present over the summer, just taking a little breather on the podcast. All right. I love you so much, and I will see you next week. Bye.